Hi, I'm Connie Lee, and I'm here again with Dr. Amy Akers, who is the Chief Scientific Officer of Angioma Alliance. And we started talking about research and her involvement with Angioma Alliance over the years, and the types of things that she's been doing most recently for us, as well as the broader picture of how she's been involved in getting us to real treatments for the illness. And I wanted to continue this conversation a little bit and ask you at this point, what is it that gives you hope? That gives you hope that the treatments are coming and that the world is going to be better for people with venous angiomas.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I know treatments never come as fast as we want them to, but they are coming. And just the progress that has happened over the last 10 years in CCM science is just absolutely incredible. 15 years ago, we didn't even know all the genes that cause the illness. And now we've gone from gene to figuring out what the genes do. And then once you know what the genes do, you can start to put the puzzle together and attack what the genes have a function. You know, they function normally within the endothelial cells that make up the blood vessels. And when they're not there, when they're not functional, there's some defects that have those blood vessels that cause cavernous angiomas. So now that we are starting to learn about what those defects are, we can attack the defects chemically and starting to tease that together. So, you know, my hope is that, and I'm really excited about clinical trials. You know, I'm really excited to see drug treatments coming around. And they are coming. Just they have to be done well. They have to be done intelligently, properly controlled, and with proper science behind them, proper backing that the FDA will allow us to move forward with clinical trials. So all this work is kind of ongoing right now. There's a couple of molecules that are really interesting, and there are different levels of development that I can tell you about. So Tempol is one that came out of a really interesting drug screen at Recursion Pharmaceuticals. So Recursion has a cool system that they set up that involves bioengineering and computers and lights and colors that I frankly don't understand all of, but what they can do is they can take cells that are defective in a CCM gene and they look funny. They look funny to the computer. They're leaky to us. We understand that they're leaky, but the computer can see them as looking inappropriate, and then somehow they code it with colors. So what they can do is they can take a plate of all these different cells and put them in different wells. So you can have a plate that's about this big and it's got 384 wells on it. So each of those wells can be treated with a different chemical. So you can very quickly screen through a lot of different chemicals, known drugs, chemicals that might be drugs. So they've done thousands and thousands of chemicals to see what would fix the defects in these cells, and a couple of things popped up. Vitamin D3 was one that we've all talked about, and Tempol is another one that came up. Tempol's an anti-inflammatory molecule that, you know, it's available as a drug. They're going to try to repurpose it and have trials with it down the road. And I think this is really cool. It's a really interesting mechanism that they use to identify a potential molecule to treat CCM without necessarily understanding the direct science of it, which is another target, another way we'll talk about in just a minute. But I think that the recursion strategy is really interesting, and Tempol is an exciting molecule, and we'll see where that takes us. Kind of a more direct approach that folks have taken, you know, a number of years ago, we saw this study that came out about simvastatin, and people got all excited about statins. And simvastatin was interesting because it similarly fixed the defects in these cells, the endothelial cells. And the reason it does that is because the endothelial cells have defects in the signaling that they call Rho kinase. And I know this is a lot of jargon, just bear with me. So Rho kinase is defective. Simvastatin has a lot of different effects. One of which is Rho kinase signaling. Simvastatin, for a variety of reasons, might be the best drug for CCM patients, but we're in the beginning stages of a drug of a clinical trial for atorvastatin. So atorvastatin is a bit stronger of a statin drug, and I think that will be a really interesting study up on clinicaltrials.gov. It's not yet recruiting. It's looking for funding at this point in time, but you know that's another clinical trial that will be coming, you know, within the near future. And then another drug I'll talk about, or another molecule really is not even a drug at this point in time, is this molecule called BA1049. And BA1049 is interesting because it's another Rho kinase inhibitor, a direct Rho kinase inhibitor. It was directly made to affect that Rho kinase that's acting inappropriately within our endothelial cells of CCM patients. So BA1049 is being developed by a company called Bioaxome Biosciences out of Cambridge, Massachusetts. And they're a cool little company that is interested in Rho kinases. They originally were interested in using Rho kinase inhibition to fix spinal cord injury, which is another drug they developed. in late-stage clinical trials now, and we were able to contact them several years ago and say, hey, Rho kinases are really kind of interesting for CCM therapy as well. Would you all be interested in kind of joining our CCM research community? And they were. They came to our scientific meetings and have sparked these new collaborations with our academic researchers, and it's been a really interesting partnership. So it's neat where CCM science is right now. We're in a lot of different places, and there's a lot of different moving parts in terms of repurposing drugs that are already available out there on the market, and then maybe this new designer drug would be even better. We don't know. We don't know what to expect, but it's nice to have different irons in the fire, so to speak, and I think that's really cool. And the BA1049, I believe, is in mice or going into mice, so it's in that preclinical stage. It's got to do mice first, and then larger safety studies before it can go to clinical trials. So it's a few years behind, but still very, very interesting.
Has received orphan drug designation. What does that mean?
Yeah, orphan product designation is really important for regulatory controls. What it does, when you have an orphan, so orphan means that you have a population that is rare, that when you develop the drug will serve less than 200,000 people in the United States. So financially, for a pharmaceutical company, it's challenging to develop these drugs, which is why we see skyrocketing prices on drugs for rare diseases. So the FDA, back in 1980, I believe it was, created this orphan product designation that gives financial incentives to pharmaceutical companies specifically to develop rare disease drugs. It gives them market exclusivity. It helps them through the regulatory process. It decreases the price of their marketing package. A couple of things all tied together that helps them get through that financial hurdle and encourages them to make a drug for rare diseases. And not a big blockbuster drug for cardiovascular disease that everyone will take after they're 55 or something. So Tempol Recursion Pharmaceuticals received orphan product designation for Tempol last year, I believe it was, and that was a big step for them in moving forward on the clinical road with that.
And then tell me about vitamin D3 and why that's not going to trials.
Vitamin D3, well, that would be a really hard one to control for. Frankly, it comes from the sun. It comes from, everybody can take it. Right now, there's no recommendations to take simvastatin or atorvastatin or take any type of drug specifically for CCM therapy unless you need it for cardiovascular therapy. And Tempol or vitamin D3, we're kind of in the same boat. What we want to do is we want to see folks have their vitamin D levels checked, and if they're not high enough, increase your vitamin D. Take a vitamin D supplement. It's an easy thing to do to help protect yourself.
Okay. And so, what are the current obstacles that you see to better treatments, and what do you feel like you're doing to help overcome them?
Yeah. So, clinical trials are fraught with all types of obstacles. There's getting to clinical trials. There's proving the efficacy and the safety of a drug, in order to get to the clinical trials large scale with CCM patients. That's one part of it. The other part is actually getting through clinical trials. Lots of clinical trials fail because of study design and recruitment issues. And that is where I and Angioma Alliance will have a very big role, as we work with our researchers to develop clinical trials and fill clinical trials down the road. Recruitment will be incredibly important. We will need to, I'm really focusing in the next couple of years to increase the attendance or the participation on our patient registry, because that will be a primary mechanism we use to recruit folks for clinical trials down the road. And then also study design and outcome measures. We're talking about an illness that's extremely variable. So what does a drug treatment mean to you or to somebody over there or somebody over there? It might mean something completely different. So a project Angioma Alliance is working on. So the point is, we don't want to just measure headache. We don't want a drug that simply reduces headache or simply reduces hemorrhage. We want a drug that makes you feel better and increases quality of life kind of overall. So Angioma Alliance is embarking on this really exciting project where we are developing a patient-reported outcome measurement instrument. So essentially what it is it will be an extensive questionnaire that can be used to measure your quality of life. It'll have different metrics in it. It'll cover headaches. It'll cover hemorrhage. It'll cover pain. It'll cover all of these different important symptoms. Symptoms are important to the CCM community, and then allow us to actually measure them. And then you can kind of put all the measurements together and have a nice outcome measurement that can be compared between individuals for clinical trials. So it's a way that we can measure the effect of a drug on everybody, as opposed to just people who have headaches or just people who have hemorrhage. And I think this is going to be an awesome project. It's going to be a long-term project, and we're going to partner with an expert team at the University of Rochester who's made several of these before and is very, very successful in using them in clinical trials. And the research strategy is kind of interesting. So they're going to start by talking to CCM patients, talking directly to people that we're interested in, and seeing what are the symptoms that are most important to them. What are the things that impact their daily life, and then develop the questionnaire off of that. There's a lot of professionals involved here: psychometricians, biostatisticians, all types of people who are really well qualified to put this together. But I think it'll be a fantastic tool. In their experience in developing tools for other disease areas, it's even brought in additional pharmaceutical interest to the field, because once you have a tool like this in an easy way, or not easy, but a great way to measure outcome from a clinical trial, then it makes it so much easier for pharmaceutical industries to have interest in the field. It kind of lowers them, so to speak, and makes it easier. It's a big project that we're